Hello, we're in the final part of this series on corporate level strategy, and this shouldn't take but a few minutes. I'd like to talk for just a minute about the means to achieve diversification. Well, we have acquisitions and mergers are two of the ways we often hear about. An acquisition is where we go and simply buy a company outright. And this is a fairly straightforward proposition. We know who the ownership's going to be. We know who the leadership's going to be. Mergers, on the other hand, often bring together two companies, and there's some question where it has to be negotiated as to you had two CEOs at one time. One's now going to be perhaps the chairman of the board, and the other is going to be the CEO or CEO and COO. You simply don't know how those mergers are going to work, and those require a fair amount of negotiation. Pooling resources with other companies with a firm's own resource base. We have things called joint ventures and strategic alliances. Often we'll see as people are trying to develop new technologies that they will come together on joint ventures and strategic alliances. In healthcare, and we were talking earlier about Kaiser Permanente, one of the things that they will often do is form joint ventures or strategic alliances with other large health systems in order to get enough patients in a clinical trial. In other words, it often takes tens of thousands of patients with a very particular illness in order to effectively conduct a clinical trial. And therefore, in order to do that, you have to form a joint venture or strategic alliance. And for some diseases like cancer, for example, where you often do not have, cancer is not just one disease, cancer is literally hundreds of diseases, and the way that they're going about trying to make them go away or cure them is they have to aggregate up all the people who have a particular form of a cancer. And these strategic alliances exist in an ongoing basis, and you can recontract for them. Internal development or corporate entrepreneurship. You occasionally hear this referred to as intrapreneurship. I won't talk about Mac, although they're one of the more famous examples of this, but often people will have a research and development wing dedicated to nothing but this. Mergers and acquisitions. This is how you gain value by acquiring other firms. It's that simple. Can lead to consolidation within an industry. You see this, I'm trying to think of an industry where we've seen it recently where there were many players who suddenly came together. As CD players became more prominent and record labels had fewer companies or fewer customers, we saw a great deal of consolidation in the record industry. The airline industry has also had a great deal of consolidation within the past few years. Corporations can also enter new market segments by way of acquisition. A few years ago, actually many years ago, things like Dr. Pepper and RC Cola were relatively regional in their nature. And what would happen is Coca-Cola and Pepsi would go in and buy those bottling companies to introduce their new products into those markets, and by the way, then go ahead and take things like Dr. Pepper and RC and remarket them back out across a larger market share. Limitations. Competing firms can often imitate any advantages realized by mergers and acquisition. In other words, buying something that can be easily replicated is not a good idea. One of the biggest fiascos in recent memory was something called the Time Warner merged with AOL. Many of you won't be old enough to remember AOL. It was one of the early online companies a la Google and Yahoo, and at the time it was really big, but it was little more than an email and messaging service. And guess what? Time Warner bought this at a super premium. And as it turns out, creating an email server wasn't all that hard. So that was not a good acquisition, to say the least. There can be many cultural issues that doom intended benefits from M&A endeavors, mergers and acquisitions. In healthcare, and revert back to the hospitals, hospitals have discrete identities. In other words, Moses Cone is different from Wesley Long. Many of the nurses and other people who worked there did it their way, and they have different processes, procedures, governance rules, and when you go through and try to change those, it can be very difficult. And in fact, it often leads to actually having to change the physical layout of hospitals in order to accommodate those sorts of different policies. Strategic alliances and joint ventures. Again, introducing successful products or services into a new market. Apple with the iPhone and AT&T was a product and or service, it was actually both, introduced into a new market, and they had to partner as a strategic alliance to do that. As you see over time, that strategic alliance is coming apart as Verizon is now permitted to sell iPhones, and other phones have come into, smartphones have come into the market. You can join other firms to reduce manufacturing cost. I'm not quite sure of a good example of people sharing manufacturing facilities. I think the garment industry would probably be one where, since items are typically produced in what they call runs, in other words, I want you to make 200 tennis shoes, 200 pairs of tennis shoes that say Michael Jordan, and then the next week somebody can go in and lease out that facility and make 200 pairs of Birkenstocks. By sharing that manufacturing capacity, they can pool their capital, etc., and make use of common facilities. To develop or diffuse new technologies. This is when the expertise is needed to bring people together in order to make different things happen. One thing you'll see that's happening in the shoe industry, again, we'll go back to this, is Nike is partnering with a company called Garmin. Garmin's the people who build your navigation systems for your automobiles. They also happen to do a great deal with athletics, making running watches and the like. But if you're going to have those effectively integrated where you're counting the number of footfalls, for example, that means you got to talk to the people that own the shoes. Another technology that needs to be introduced is the music feature. Many people run to music. So they're forming joint ventures with Garmin, Nike, again, Apple with MP3 capability. These things often simply do not work. Often the cultures are too different and simply can't be brought together. The partners overstated their strengths and aren't able to deliver, etc. Why do people do this to begin with? Well, there's growth for growth's sake. Egotism. Everybody wants to be bigger. How do people hold this off? Green mail. What is green mail? Green mail and golden parachutes, poison pills are all variants on the same concept. Or excuse me, in order to buy me, you have to pay our leadership so much, this is the green mail, that it makes the deal unprofitable. And that forms a golden parachute for those executives who, when the corporation is sold, then get to have it. And then there's also poison pills. Well, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to watch these. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to send me a note or two about the topic I mentioned as the extra credit. Bye-bye.